Shift happens, sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance. And when it does, you have two options. You can either cling to the life you've outgrown or step into the version of you that knows she's meant for more. I'm Gialacqua, trauma-informed empowerment coach and founder of Radical Prioritization. Welcome to What the Shift, the podcast for women who've outgrown the life they've built and are ready to create one that finally fits. Here we get real about the shifts that change everything: identity shifts, career pivots, relationship resets, mindset breakthroughs, and learning how to finally release what's holding you back. You don't have to have it all figured out. Just be ready for what's next. It's time to shift. If life is shifting, you're exactly where you need to be. I'm Gialacqua, and welcome to What the Shift. Today, I am so excited to introduce you to Courtney Youngs. Courtney is a wife, mother, corporate communicator, and storyteller. Courtney is a self-proclaimed recovering perfectionist who loves a perfect plan and who has experience with her plans perfectly failing. Courtney's new book, The Waggle Dance, is a book that honors the people in her life and helps us all to embrace our unique life experiences and the lessons they yield. It's a relatively simple concept that requires introspection and a willingness to live the life God has created for you, and maybe not the one you had planned, to help yourself and others. She's a passionate life listener and thrives helping people to find and embrace their unique stories. Courtney, welcome to the show. So happy to have you join us today.
Thanks so much, Gia. I appreciate the chance.
Yeah, so I'm excited to chat with you about the Waggle Dance and kind of your backstory. So just so our listeners can get to know you a little bit better, tell us a little bit what led you to where you are today and what led you to write the book.
Well, I'll start answering with the latter. What led me to write the book was, man, I was in a place where life looked completely opposite to what I had planned. And I was only in my mid-20s. So there was a lot to figure out. And I am a storyteller. I have always been a storyteller, but the way that I process the world is through writing. And so when I was in this unplanned, definitely less than perfect place in my life, the only thing I really knew to do was to write about it. And it had started and stopped several times and throughout many years. And then ultimately, a greater plan for my life had started to unfold. And that's when I picked up the proverbial pen again and kind of looked at life through a different lens. And that's what the Waggle Dance is all about. But as you mentioned in your intro, I am the girl next door in many definitions. I am a newish mom. I've got a toddler and a 5-month-old. I am a proud wife, and I have been in the corporate communication space for a little over a decade now. So I am very rarely bored, but I am always happy to have these kind of conversations. So thank you again for having me today.
Of course, I love that. What a great intro. So, since we talk about life shifts, tell us what helped you. I know you said you saw things through a different lens. What helped you make that shift?
First of all, I really think that my next bumper sticker is going to be life shifts, because nothing feels more on brand than that. So again, love it. Couldn't love it more. What shifted for me was I was, again, in a place, and to shed some light on it, my grandmother had passed away, which we all know has nothing to do with planning, but it was traumatic nonetheless for me. I was in my mid-20s, like I mentioned, and I was going through a divorce. I was then falling in love with someone significantly older than me. I was changing up things in my career. Like, I was just all over the place. And the thing that shifted the most for me in this moment was I realized how much of my life I had lived based on what I perceived a perfect plan was, and also what I perceived people's perceptions of said perfect plan would be. And when I kind of admitted that to myself, which is a hard thing to do, I realized, boy, this is not going to end well, right? It doesn't feel good. And so I stopped as much as I could doing that and started thinking about what felt good and real to me, and how could I actively and wholeheartedly pursue those things. So it was a lot of letting go, a lot of shifting, lots of shifting in my heart and mind, and then kind of just deciding to be more intentional about kind of the next chapters of my life.
That's incredible. And so you had it all going on. You had the divorce, a new relationship, a career pivot. You were dealing with grief and loss. So you just had all the things hit you
Yeah.
at once, it sounds
I
like.
like to do it all at once, you know? I'm just kidding. I did
Yeah.
not plan I obviously did not plan it that way, but it was a lot. There was not one corner of my life, when I think back to that, there was not one corner of my life that felt normal or steady. It was all over the place.
Yeah. So it's those moments that make us stop and reflect
Mhm,
and really sort of think about what are we doing here? Right.
mhm,
And ask ourselves those big philosophical questions.
mhm.
So I love how you talked about planning. You are a planner. I think a lot of high achieving women listening can relate. We like to have plans. We like to execute on those plans, and when life doesn't go according to those plans, right, our world gets a little bit shaken up,
Mhm.
which often is not a bad thing.
I think it's
But it's
actually a
hard to
great thing.
embrace it in those moments.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah. In the moment, it may not feel that way, but life has a way of shifting for us and not necessarily to us.
agreed.
Tell us more about the book. Tell us what the Waggle Dance is about,
Mhm.
and what your goal was in writing the book.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is not uncommon for people to ask me, "What's Waggle Dance?" And I think it's a fair question because a couple of years ago, I didn't even know. And when I was in the moments that we've talked about, I would, it wasn't uncommon for me to pick up the phone, have a conversation with a few girlfriends about everything I was thinking and feeling and experiencing. And people would be like, "Oh, you should totally write a book about that." And I remember being like, "No, I should totally not. Like, I don't want any of this in writing." But what I started to appreciate in those conversations was just how much life had actually been pouring into me, through the experiences that I was having, through the people that I had met, um, and how much I felt like I needed to pay that forward. And so when I talked about that, like, hey, if I were to write about anything, it would be about the goodness in this all. And a very dear friend of mine said, "Well, Courtney, that's what a waggle dance is." And I thought, I mean, what is that? I don't dance. And she said, "Well, it's easy. It's what bees do to help each other survive. They go out, they learn about food, water, shelter, and then they come back and they do a figure eight dance for their friends, and that helps the bee friends survive." And I thought, well, isn't that a crazy, beautiful, wonderful metaphor for how we could all live our life? And in fact, I have not still to this day talked to many bees, but I could make an educated guess that not many, if any, are worried about being perfect or what their plans are. Instead, their focus is to experience life for themselves and then use what they've learned through their experiences to help the person behind them. And it was in that moment that I thought, this is it. It is not about being perfect or planned. It is about listening to our lives. So often I think life is like screaming at us, trying to talk to us, and we don't listen. And I think it's beautiful when we have these moments that cause us to listen and think about what we're experiencing, what we're learning. And then the whole premise of the waggle dance is to take those two things and think about, what would I tell someone now who is going through what I've been through? And so that's what the book is about. I introduced this concept, and I'm an open book, literally and figuratively. So I wrote all about it. What I swore I never would write about, I did it. But I did it because I'm a believer in that, hey, I've been there too moment. But what I really want readers to take away from it is that this is within all of our power to do the exact same thing. So less perfect, less polished, the better, because I promise what you're yielding from those are gifts that should be shared.
That's a beautiful story, and I love the bee analogy. That is
Thank you.
absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing your story with the world to help others. And I think a lot of us don't realize that impact doesn't have to be these grand gestures. It doesn't have to be a TED Talk. It doesn't have to be a book. They can be in those everyday moments where you impact someone else. So, but I think it's important to recognize you have to know yourself first. And I think a lot of us sort of lose sight of who we are and who we're becoming. So, you and I are passionate about the concept of reinvention. Tell us a little bit about, as you went through some of these life shifts, what that looked like for you.
In so many ways, I felt like I was at the door of a second chance. I had gotten to the place where things weren't as they appeared. I was bearing the brunt, if you will, of some of that. And I thought, well, if I'm going to go, I'm going to do it the way that feels really good to me, and that at the end of, my life, I will look back and think that that was it. And so it was scary, to answer your question. I had grown up with these hard truths that I had prescribed for myself, one of which was that I would never, under any situation, be divorced. And I made it to 26 before that wasn't true anymore. Right. And a good friend of mine, and I wrote about it in the book, would always tell me, forward, Courtney. And so that's where my eyesight was. It was on how I want to move forward, and how, things didn't go as planned, but now I'm back in the driver's seat, and I have the opportunity, because of what I've gone through and experienced, to make different decisions for myself. So that fear kind of melted into an empowerment place. And it gave me the chance to grow in self-awareness and in confidence that, quite frankly, I had realized I hadn't done yet. And that was a gift in of itself, to know what you want, or to at least be brave enough to ask and answer your own questions without the input of the world around you. That's nothing but growth.
Yeah, and I love how you described stepping into the self-awareness and gaining the confidence and tuning into yourself, because again, we are so focused on the external. We tend to lose sight of that. And so I think it's an important point, being introspective, asking ourselves, what do we want? What do we need? Because we don't take the time to do that. And sometimes life has a way of forcing us to do that, right? When we don't do it ourselves. And so I think there's such power in what you just said. So how does one figure out what their story is, Courtney?
Absolutely. Well, the way that I always think about it is, and I love that you already started from a place of acknowledging that everybody has a story. I've worked with enough people, and 9 times out of 10, the first thing that we have to get through is someone believing that they don't have a story, because they haven't had this monumental or this huge moment in their lives that they think, hey, this is a story worth sharing. Every single day you have the chance to know and tell your story. And so the way I always think about it, or the way that I go into it, either for myself or when I'm working with people, is, let's think about something in your life that you've been through. It doesn't have to be big, but it's going to feel significant to you. What did you learn? Because I promise you learned something, especially if it was unplanned or less than perfect. And what would you tell somebody, to the person coming behind you? And if you just start with those three pillars, it is kind of amazing how you can tell a story or start to connect dots into your own life about, oh, this is why, I light up in this corner, or this is why I'm passionate, or this is why this feels good, because all of a sudden you're giving yourself this hindsight view of who you are and why you are the way you are.
Absolutely. The question I ask clients oftentimes is, what are your life defining moments? Now, to your point, they don't have to be huge, significant, uh, you know, things that have happened. They could be smaller things, but they impacted who you are as a person and the person you've become. They've impacted, to your point, your story. And so those moments, I think it's important to stop and reflect on those moments that made you who you are today.
That's exactly what I wrote about in the book, and what I hope people who read it could take their own journey on. But you'll see, if you read it, yeah, I talk about divorce. I talk about losing my grandmother. I talk about my first day on the big job. But I also talk about a random meeting that I went to one day, and someone said something to me that totally caught my attention. And now is like one of the pillars of things. It's assume goodness and confidence out of people you meet. And I have no doubt that half of those moments were super nonchalant to the people, but it is amazing what sticks with you, and what forms you on how you think, who you are, what you want.
Yeah, those impactful moments it might just be another Tuesday for the other person, right? But for you, it's a monumental shift.
For sure.
Yeah, I love that. So tell us, in your experience, Courtney, what has been the greatest lesson that your life has taught you so far?
Oh, this is a good one. You know, and it is my mantra. It is the thing I go to every day. And it is not an uncommon phrase, but I'm on the record saying I believe in the depths of my heart that it was my grandmother who said it first. And that is, this too shall pass. And I say that with a light heart and humor because I think many grandmothers have whispered those wise words to their grandchildren. But for me, my grandma was my number one, is my number one on many definitions. But what that phrase taught me was, yes, we can all conceptually get that the hard times eventually pass one way or the other, but so do the good times. And I think that so often high achieving women, planners, I'll state the obvious. What's next? What do I need to do to get there? What needs to be done before I have to be here or do that? And how sad it would be to get to the end of it and realize every moment that had passed along the way. If we don't pump the brakes a little bit and sit in them. And so it's hard for me. I am a list maker, cross it off, endorphins flying, the more things that are checked off my list kind of person. But I have found that my true joy and happiness comes in the moments that I sit and I absorb and I take them for everything they're worth. And, I mentioned I'm a newish mom, so this is maybe front and center of my brain and heart at the time, but it's true in all the other chapters too. The things that I wished and I said I couldn't wait to end or couldn't wait to get to, they either ended or I got to them. And unfortunately, a lot goes along with that too. So I always whisper it to myself and I hold it very near to me.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder, and I think what you said is also really important. It's not just the negative experiences that will pass, it's the good moments too, the happy ones too, right? So makes us sort of appreciate those moments a little bit more. Courtney, what advice would you give to women listening who are saying, "Yeah, that's me. I'm the control freak. I'm the type A planner. Everything needs to go according to my plan." I think I even have a mug somewhere from way back in my corporate days that says I'm totally flexible as long as everything is the way I planned it. And so I don't live by that mantra anymore, but certainly describes who I was at one point in my life. And so what advice would you give to your younger self or to those women listening who are relating to that situation?
I will also say that I have to tell myself this every single day. Like this is an active challenge for me. Someone once told me that often what helps you excel can become your ceiling if you are not aware of
Mm.
it. And so, for many of us, Gia, the way we are wired, and even just as women, right, we get it done. We know we do. And those are all good things. So, I'm not suggesting on any measure that we stop being who we are, but I think it's important to be aware of that. Because, like we kind of talked about at the beginning, I really, truly, in my heart of hearts, believe that life is more beautiful, more empowering, more fulfilling when we listen to it versus try to control and plan it. And when we sit and listen to our lives and let go a little bit, I think that there is a sense of peace and a sense of fulfillment that is absent when we are kind of tight fist on it.
Yeah. So being open to receiving and being guided as opposed to having every single moment planned the way you have it in your mind.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. And like you talk about, it's not always what we have in our mind, but we will evolve into the person we are meant to become through those moments that forge us.
I believe it. I'm not so easy to hang my hat on everything happens for a reason. I think that phrase turns a lot of people off because there's a lot of
Sure.
things that maybe we don't always get the blessing of knowing a reason for. But I do believe in all things working together for good, one way or the other. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you said, being open to that redirection when it hits us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that. So, Courtney, tell us, what is the one shift that changed everything for you?
I'll never forget, I was in a meeting and I was right smack dab in the middle of a divorce. And I was so ashamed. I was so embarrassed. I felt really bad about who I was and what had been going on. And I was meeting with a woman who just was pure light. Like she's just one of those people that you want to like sit and have coffee with and like through osmosis, can I be like you? Like I want to radiate like you. And I didn't know her well, which is probably why this moment was even more surprising. But she's kind of talking about her family a little bit, which was like picture perfect. They're all beautiful. And then she kind of casually mentions that, several years ago she went through a divorce. And I remember like, oh my gosh, you've been there too. And if you can be where you are, that means so can I. And not only
Mm.
selfishly did that like kind of let me let some air out, right? But I thought how beautiful those moments are and how they can happen every single day. She was so brave and so vulnerable, and we barely knew each other. And she gave me such a gift. And I remember thinking, this is a call to action. This is a different way to look at life. This is a reminder that like those I've been there too moments are within all of our reaches if we just kind of open our hearts to a posture of receiving and to sending. So that was the biggest shift. And it probably happened on a Tuesday, to your point. It was just a random Tuesday, but it was a big one.
So that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. I think, a couple things come up for me when I hear you talk about that moment for you, which is the vulnerability of someone else to share their story and experience. It's hard, no doubt, especially when you're a high achieving woman and you feel like you should have it all figured out. And then you find yourself in a place where, okay, maybe this wasn't what I thought. Maybe this wasn't what I expected. Maybe this wasn't what I planned. But to have somebody else share their story and see them come out on the other side for you and many others, that was a very impactful moment. And now the beauty is you are then paying that forward to all the other recipients of your message and your book, which is just incredibly beautiful. So, even though vulnerability can be very hard, as Brene Brown beautifully says, right? It is so critical for growth and connection. And so I think there's a lot of value there. The other thing I want to go back to that you said was for high achieving women, a lot of times our strengths and our skills end up becoming our ceiling. And I think that's a very important point that we, as high achieving women, it's hard to see that because the things that have made you successful and have driven your success are often the things that at a certain point in time will end up holding you back. So whether it's people pleasing, perfectionistic tendencies, uh, the control freak, whatever that looks like for you, oftentimes we get to a point where it's actually hurting us instead of helping us, but it's so hard for us to see that.
Mhm.
So I'm just curious, any other words of wisdom or advice that you would give for women who are feeling maybe that pressure, that tension of, I've worked so hard for this life and maybe it's not what I thought it would be. It doesn't feel successful, even though I am successful.
Yeah. So first of all, you got to look inward first. You got to be asking and answering some tough questions, and do it before it's too late. You and I have talked before. I hit a big, big wall last year, and it was like a lot of great things going on in my life, but I burned myself to the ground, because I wasn't even though I was publishing this book about this inward journey, I took my eyes off the site for just a minute and I was starting to get back to a similar place. So you gotta find that time to be intentional and look inward. And
Sure.
our intuition is at the top of our skills, right? Like women have amazing intuition, and God gave us that for a reason, in my opinion. So don't overlook that one. And when those little alarm bells start going off, or my mom always says the hairs on the back of your neck, whatever it is for you,
Right.
look around you. Um, because there are people like yourself, and I'm not just saying that, Gia, who are standing there with their hands stretched out saying, I've been there. Let me help you through this. I've been where you are. Social media is what it is. Some days I love it. Some days I wish it didn't exist, but it's an
Yeah.
easy tool that most of us spend more time than we want to admit on, where you can get connected to people who are expressing a similar place to either where you are or where you have been, etc. Reach out, follow, engage, fill your mind and heart with things that are helpful, not harmful. So again, start inward, use that intuition, and then start looking around you, because I guarantee you there are people and resources who can help provide clarity or help. or just someone to put their arm around you that says, I've been there too.
Hmm. Beautiful advice. I love that. Thank you, Courtney. And where can our listeners find you? Where can they learn more about you and buy a copy of the Waggle Dance?
Well, the book, The Waggle Dance, is everywhere books are sold. We all love some Amazon Prime in our lives, so it is definitely there as well. But you can find me. I am on Instagram. Speaking of social media, so it's at the underscore Waggle Dance. LinkedIn. I know many of us love to connect professionally using that platform, so please, please do. I love it. Nothing fills my cup faster than being connected and being able to share stories like this one and conversations. And if there's a way that I can help, or that if the Waggle Dance touches you, it would be a gift for me to know that. So please find me.
Incredible. Courtney, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, for the light and the love that you're putting into the world. I so appreciate you.
Thank you. That feeling is very mutual.
Thanks, Courtney. And I want to thank you for tuning in today. We will see you next week. Now go make shift happen. All right, Shifter, that's a wrap on today's episode of What the Shift. But here's the thing, awareness is just the first step. The real shift happens when you decide to do something with it. So before you go back to business as usual, ask yourself, what is one thing you are done carrying? What's one shift you're ready to make? And if this episode hit home, don't keep it to yourself. Hit subscribe, leave a review, and send it to a woman who needs to hear this, because we shift together. Remember, you don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to take the next step. And I'll be right here next week, ready to shift with you. This is What the Shift, and we are just getting started.